I bought my ranch for peace. Wide open fields, the smell of fresh hay in the morning, cattle lowing under the sun, and a sky so big it felt like you could drown in the blue. It was supposed to be my escape from the noise of city life, from politics and gossip and people who couldn't mind their own business. Out here, behind the wooden gate I'd built with my own two hands, it was supposed to be just me, the land, and the kind of freedom my grandfather used to talk about. But freedom doesn't mean much when someone keeps barging through your gate like they own the place. Her name was Karen, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen before, you know exactly the type. Nose in everyone's business, voice sharp enough to slice glass, a constant belief that rules didn't apply to her, only to everyone else. Now here's the kicker. My ranch wasn't even in the HOA. My land sat just outside their subdivision, separated by a half-mile of fencing and pasture. But Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA board, drove through my gate anyway. At first I thought it was a mistake. The gate was clearly marked, private property, no trespassing. I'd even hung an old horseshoe above the sign for good luck. But one evening, as I was feeding the horses, I heard the creak of hinges and the crunch of tires. Sure enough, there was Karen's shiny SUV rolling right through like she owned the dirt road. She didn't wave, didn't even look at me, just kept going, kicking up dust like I was invisible. I let it slide once, but once turned into twice. Then twice turned into every other day. Sometimes she'd cut across my land as a shortcut to the highway. Other times she'd drive in just to snoop around, claiming she was checking for code violations, like her HOA authority extended to my pasture. It didn't matter how many times I told her to stop. Karen thought the rules were hers to make, and mine to follow. The last straw came one Saturday morning. I'd just finished repairing a section of fence when I saw her SUV at the gate. This time she didn't even wait for it to open properly. She pushed right through, scraping the wood, breaking one of the latches I'd installed. My blood boiled as I ran to flag her down. She just smirked from behind the wheel and said, "Maybe if you kept this place up to community standards, you wouldn't have problems." Community standards. On my ranch, on my land. That's when I realized something important. Karen wasn't just trespassing. She was challenging me, testing whether I'd roll over like everyone else in her little kingdom. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. I'm a veteran. I've dealt with worse than HOA bullies and SUVs. I've seen what happens when arrogance goes unchecked, when someone believes their power is absolute. And I wasn't about to let this woman think she could stomp all over my life without consequences. So I set a trap, not the kind that would hurt her. No, I'm not cruel. But the kind that would teach her, once and for all, that some gates are meant to stay closed. A trap so perfectly laid that when it finally snapped shut, Karen wouldn't just be embarrassed. She'd be exposed. What she didn't know was that every drive through my gate, every smug smirk she flashed, every fence she bent and sign she ignored, it was all fuel for the plan I was building. A plan that would make the whole town stop and say, "Did you hear what happened to Karen?" Because when you push a man far enough on his own land, eventually, he pushes back. And when I finally did, nobody in this town saw it coming. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first. Life on a ranch teaches you patience. Fences break, storms roll in, animals get sick. Nothing goes according to plan. You fix what's broken, you adapt, and you carry on. That's the rhythm I came here for. After 20 years in the military, all I wanted was quiet mornings with my coffee, the smell of hay in the breeze, and the sound of cattle instead of city traffic. But HOA Karen didn't understand patience. She understood control. She was the kind of person who treated her title, president of the subdivision's HOA, like a sheriff's badge. She measured lawns, scolded teenagers for skateboarding, and left violation notices on people's doors like it was Christmas morning. Most of the neighbors rolled their eyes and paid her fines just to avoid the fight. But her reach was supposed to stop at the edge of her subdivision. My ranch wasn't in her HOA. My land was private, fenced, clearly posted with no trespassing signs. And yet, Karen treated my gate like her personal shortcut. At first she gave excuses. It's quicker to get to the highway. Or, I was just checking the back road for safety. But excuses turned into entitlement. Every week I'd hear the clang of my gate and the crunch of her SUV tires. Sometimes she'd drive slow, peering at my barns like she was auditing me. Other times, she'd speed through, scattering chickens and leaving dust clouds over the pasture. I tried talking to her. Calm, reasonable. "Ma'am, this is private property. You're not allowed back here." She waved me off like a pesky fly. "If you kept your land up to community standards, maybe we wouldn't have to check." Community standards. On my land, she didn't stop. In fact, she got bolder. Once, she brought her friends from the HOA with her, showing them around my ranch like it was part of their jurisdiction. Another time, she clipped my fence with her bumper and never bothered to fix it. When I confronted her, she smirked and said, "Maybe if your gate was sturdier, this wouldn't happen." It wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was disrespect. It was arrogance. It was Karen testing whether I'd fold like everyone else. That's when I realized I couldn't handle this the normal way. The sheriff wouldn't do much. They were tired of HOA drama. A lawsuit would drag on for months, maybe years, and Karen would spin it like she was the victim. If I wanted to stop her, I needed to think different. I needed something she couldn't ignore, couldn't twist, and couldn't laugh off. So I started planning. Every time she drove through my gate, she thought she was untouchable. She thought I was powerless. But what she didn't know was that I was building a response, something that would end her little game once and for all. And when it was ready, Karen wouldn't just stop driving through my gate. She'd never forget what happened next. Karen thought she was untouchable. That smug grin every time she pushed through my gate lit a fire in me, but instead of acting rashly, I let her keep digging her own grave. The first step was observation. I logged every trespass, dates, times, even the way she drove. Mondays at 8 a.m. to save time getting to work. Fridays around 5:30 p.m., speeding home. Sundays, a slow roll with her friends as if my ranch was a sightseeing tour. She was nothing if not predictable. The second step was preparation. I reinforced my gate, not with the intention of keeping her out, but of holding her in. Hidden latches, chains disguised under fresh woodwork, and a clever little mechanism I'd learned back in the service. To the naked eye, the gate looked ordinary, but once shut, it wouldn't open without the release key, and I was the only one who had it. The third step was patience. It took everything in me not to blow my cover when she strutted by, bragging at HOA meetings about how even the rancher can't say no to me. Neighbors whispered that I'd finally been broken. Karen believed she'd won, and that belief was the real bait. Then came the day the trap was sprung. It was a Tuesday morning, cool air hanging low over the pasture. I left the gate cracked just enough to tempt her in. I even parked my truck in the barn out of sight, making it look like I wasn't home. At exactly 7:58, I heard it, the familiar squeak of my hinges and the low rumble of Karen's SUV. She didn't even hesitate. She just drove right in, one hand on the wheel, the other holding a travel mug of coffee. The second her back bumper cleared the gate, I stepped out from behind the shed and pulled the release. With a metallic clank, the gate slammed shut and locked. Karen didn't notice at first. She kept driving, waving to herself in the rearview mirror like a queen surveying her kingdom. But when she turned to leave, reality hit her. She rolled up to the gate, pressed the gas, and nothing. The gate didn't budge. She tried reverse, forward, even honking like I'd magically appear to let her out. I stood by the barn, arms crossed, watching the panic creep across her face. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control, and that was just the beginning. The look on Karen's face when she realized she was trapped was worth every nail I'd hammered into that gate. At first, she tried bravado. She revved her engine, glaring at the wood like she could scare it open. Then came the yelling. "Open this gate right now! I'm HOA president, and this is illegal." Her voice cracked as it echoed across the pasture. My horses lifted their heads, unimpressed. I walked toward her SUV, slow and steady, boots crunching on gravel. "Karen," I said calmly, "you've been warned. This is private property. You don't belong here." She scoffed, rolling down her window. "Don't lecture me. I have the right to inspect this land. Your ranch is an eyesore, and the community—" I cut her off with a raised hand. "Community doesn't own this land. I do. And since you won't respect my gate, I had to make sure it respected you." Her smirk faltered. She tried calling someone on her phone, but out here, service was patchy at best. She waved it in the air, muttering curses, then slammed it against the steering wheel. That's when the panic set in. "You can't do this!" "People will hear about it," she shouted. "Oh, they'll hear," I replied, pulling out my own phone. I'd been recording since the moment she entered. Her trespassing wasn't just a personal grievance anymore, it was evidence. In fact, I'm thinking of sending this straight to the mayor's office. Maybe even the sheriff. I'm sure they'd love to know how the HOA president spends her mornings. Her eyes widened. For the first time, Karen looked small. But fate had one more twist for her. Just then, Rosa, my neighbor who'd grown sick of Karen's antics too, strolled up with her morning coffee. She took one look at the SUV caged behind the gate and burst out laughing. "Oh Lord, you actually did it," she said, loud enough for Karen to hear. Trapped her like a stray cow. Within minutes, word spread. Neighbors trickled in, curious about the commotion. Phones came out, videos rolled, laughter filled the air. Karen's fortress of intimidation crumbled as the people she'd bullied for years now stood on my side of the fence, watching her squirm. Karen pounded her horn, but every honk only drew more attention. The more she screamed about rights and community standards, the more ridiculous she looked, boxed in like a teenager caught sneaking out. Finally, when her voice cracked and her face turned red from rage, I stepped closer and said, "Karen, you're leaving here one of two ways. Quietly, after admitting you were wrong, or with the sheriff here to escort you. Your choice." The silence that followed was heavy. She looked at the crowd, the cameras, the smirks, the neighbors she once controlled, and I knew she felt the walls closing in. For the first time, Karen realized she'd been beaten at her own game. The sheriff showed up about 20 minutes later, and by then, Karen had run out of steam. She sat red-faced in her SUV, arms crossed, refusing to look at anyone. The once feared HOA president was now just a spectacle, surrounded by neighbors she'd tormented for years. When the deputy approached, I handed over my phone with the recording. He didn't need much convincing. Trespassing, harassment, destruction of private property, the list of her offenses practically wrote itself. Karen tried spinning her usual story about community oversight and property standards, but the deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, this is a working ranch. You have no authority here," he said flatly. "And if you keep pushing this, you'll be facing charges." The crowd of neighbors erupted into chuckles and whispers. For once, Karen's threats carried no weight. She wasn't in control anymore. I watched her deflate in that moment. The arrogance, the entitlement, it melted into something almost pitiable. Almost. She muttered a weak apology. Something about misunderstandings, and the deputy escorted her out through the same gate she had once barreled through without a second thought. That was the last time Karen ever tried to set foot on my property. But the impact didn't end there. Word of her humiliation spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Videos of her trapped behind my gate hit local social media within hours, racking up thousands of views. HOA meetings that once felt like her personal courtroom now turned against her. Every smug ruling she'd ever made was dragged back into the light. People she'd silenced for years suddenly found their voices. 2 months later, she resigned as HOA president. Not because she wanted to, but because the community she'd lorded over finally had enough and voted her out. As for me, my life went back to peace, real peace. No more surprise inspections. No more threats about my barn paint color or the way my tractor looked unsightly. I could drive through my own gate without wondering what game Karen was playing next. Neighbors I barely knew before started stopping by, bringing pie, swapping stories, and laughing about the great gate trap. For the first time in years, it felt like we weren't just neighbors. We were a community again. A community free of one woman's obsession with control. And every time I walk past that gate, I can't help but grin. Not because of revenge, but because of what it represented. Standing up for yourself when you've been pushed too far, refusing to let bullies, no matter their title, trample over your life. Karen thought she could break me. Instead, she broke her own reign of power. And my ranch? It's quieter than ever. Exactly how I like it.